Okay, as we get started today, I'd like to spend a few minutes doing some reviewing and just review some of the timeline that most of you are very familiar with already. Was anyone not in class last semester? George wasn't. So I'd like to review the timeline a little bit, and then I'd also like to review some of the geography of the land of Israel, and I think that'll help us. So let's real quickly talk about the timeline actually first. We start our timeline, of course, at creation, but really we start it with Abraham and the patriarchs, and that's on page 7 of your book. The reason I'm wanting to review is because we have a test in a couple of weeks, and so I want you to be thinking about that and getting ready for that. So you've got the sojourning in Egypt, of course the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, then the sojourning in Egypt for 430 years. The Exodus is a pinpoint date, 1446. We know that because of 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 1, 480 years from the building of Solomon's temple, going back to the Exodus from the land of Egypt. That's a hard, fast date. The reason it's hard, fast is because, and I don't think, I can't remember what I've told to whom, but there was an eclipse of the sun that happened on a specific day, and we can, of course, I don't know astronomy, but those that do tell me you can pinpoint the exact day and the exact hour that it happened thousands of years back. So in Assyrian history, they record, and from several other sources, they record this eclipse of the sun, and it definitely happened on a specific date. If you can identify what date that was, then identify the years of the kings and so on around that. Jump across from the Assyrian kings, of course, who had dealings with the Israelite kings, then you can pinpoint the actual years that Israelite kings reigned. And if you can pinpoint their years, then you can pinpoint the 4th year of Solomon's reign, which is the building of the temple. It was 966 BC when Solomon began to build his temple. Okay, so it's very interesting. The Bible has kind of puts itself, God puts his word out there on a limb for us to test it. And there's so many details that it can be tested by. And if any one of those details are wrong, right, then the Bible's wrong. And there are so many details, but it's all accurate, it's all historical, it's all factually, historically correct. So I love that fact. So 1446, the day of the Exodus. Then you've got some things in there, the time of the judges, wilderness wanderings, times of the judges, and then the United Kingdom, of course, is 3 kings. Who are they? Saul, David, and Solomon, first 3 kings, United Kingdom. Then the kingdom splits, Jeroboam, Rehoboam. Jeroboam takes the southern kingdom, Rehoboam takes the northern kingdom. And did I get that correct? No, I didn't. I had them backwards. Rehoboam gets the southern kingdom, Jeroboam takes the northern kingdom, because Jeroboam is the one who set up the 2 golden calves, the one at Dan and one at Bethel. And he led the children of Israel astray very quickly. The northern kingdom goes into apostasy almost immediately, and they, let's see here, about 200 years after they go into apostasy, after the split, 200 years later, the northern kingdom's gone. 722 BC, the Assyrians wipe out the northern kingdom capital of Samaria. The southern kingdom continues for another 130 years or so after the northern kingdom falls, and then they fall. And then there's all kinds of turmoil in the land of Israel, not really freedom, not really their own people, mixed outsiders brought in to be mixed in. I mean, that's why to this day the land of Palestine is a very divided country. It's all split up into little parts. Even in the nation of Israel, it's one nation, but it's very divided as far as the people that live there. Different direction they're going and so on. So, who ruled over Israel from the outside during from about 538 till the time of Christ? who ruled over Israel. So there's several different groups that ruled over Israel.
Rome.
Rome is one of them, but they're down the line a little bit. Let's kind of go in order. Amy? The Babylonians, who destroyed them, ruled them for a while, 586 to 538, and then who took over the Babylonians? The Persians, Medes and Persians. And so now they ruled the land of Israel for about 200 years, and then who defeated the Persians? Sorry? The Greeks? Yes, correct. Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire. And then that Greek Empire that was kind of split up, but the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire up in Syria, the north, they went back and forth, Israel in the middle. And finally, they throw off the Seleucid Empire, who ruled them. And they did it with the help of the hammer. Who was that? What are the group of people known as? The Maccabees threw off the power of the Seleucid, the Greek Empire. The Greek culture remained, but the Greek rulers were kicked out. And for a little over 100 years, the Jews ruled themselves finally. And that's called the Hasmonean kings, the Hasmonean kings. And you'll see different spellings for that, whatever. But so they ruled over themselves. And then, if you're in my Second Temple period class, we go through all these details. Then the Romans, there was two brothers that wanted rule of the kingdom of Israel. And one of them reached out to this far away, distant little group of people called the Romans, asked them for help. And the Romans said, sure, we'd be glad to help you. And they came and they helped them, and they ruled them, of course, till the fall of Israel, the fall of Jerusalem in 70 A.D., and even beyond that, for that matter. Okay, so that's kind of your Bible timeline, really. Bible is finished being written about 100 A.D., and that's pretty much our Bible timeline. Now, let's talk about geography a little bit again. I like geography, as I mentioned, maps. This is a map, again, of the land of Israel. You get down here, this is one of the arms of the Red Sea. Just you see the top little peak of it, if you can see that. We're on a fault line. So we said that there's three areas from the north to the south. What is the area to the north? Known as? We said this, not this semester. Okay, I'm going back to last semester. I just realized that. But you should know the general layout of Palestine. What's the northern area called? It surrounds the Sea of Galilee. Galilee, wow. Jeff, he's really with it today. The Galilee region, what's in the middle? The mountains of? Israel. Samaria, very good. The Samaritan region. So the Samaria, so Galilee, Samaria, what's in the south? Judea or Judah. So three areas from north to south. There's also three areas from the west going across to the east. What do you have first? Okay, you're close. These are the valleys of Shephelah that come up from the plains, but the first area is the plains. So the coastal plains. So, it's pretty easy. If you're looking at a map, you can see it's flat, then it's mountainous, and then it's a big old ditch. So the plains first, and then the mountains, the central mountains, and then the Jordan Valley. That's how it pretty easily divides up these three sections of Palestine. Okay? There's many other things we could discuss. Obviously, the biblical lands are way, way larger than just the land of Palestine. The biblical lands, of course, include all of Mesopotamia. If this map is it, you're way out here in Ur of the Chaldees, Mesopotamia. You've got Egypt off to the north, and then west you have Asia Minor. Really a large area. Of course, lowest point on earth is the Dead Sea. Even the Sea of Galilee is very low. Anybody remember about how long this is? Does anybody remember that? It's close to, from all the way down to here is about 250 miles to the top. But from here to Jerusalem is around 150, 175 miles. And so, give you an example. When we got to Jerusalem, or to Israel, our first night we spent way down here south of Beersheba. We landed at Tel Aviv. So we drove down to here and spent the night literally about 20 miles south of Beersheba. Then we spent a couple of days down in here at Masada, and then worked our way. We literally drove from Masada in the morning all the way up. By the evening we were up here at Beth Shean. So all of this we drove in one day. We didn't stop a lot of places. You do in Gedi down here in Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found and things like that. But we didn't stop at Jericho and some of these places along here. We just buzzed right on past all of the Jordan Valley, drove up through it. But it was too bad. I wanted to stop at Jericho and all these other places, and they're hard to get into unless you have some time. So, and then we spent a lot of time up in the north, and then worked our way back down and spent 3 days in Jerusalem. So that's kind of the way we did it. But it's a large area, but you can easily drive it now. What took 2 days of travel back in the old days is a nice afternoon drive now, and see all the sights and so on. It's a lot of fun. Okay, any thoughts on that?
How many times have you been to Israel?
Just once. I really want to go back. Because now I know more what I'm looking at, and I have a real interest in it. So, literally anywhere I've been to this point, and we were in lots and lots and lots of places, if I see a picture, I know where it is. I know where that was taken. I know what's around there. So it's very fun when you can understand where things were in relation to one another in the Bible stories. And the book of Judges is amazing because there's so many stories about happenings around the land, and you can really figure out where things took place. And so that's why I brought these maps with me as well. Let me quickly review just a bit also as far as the Judges, a couple of them. One that I want to show you is the victory of Deborah over the Canaanites. So this is the Sea of Galilee. The Dead Sea is even cut off from this. But this is the victory of Deborah. I'll pass this around, but all these happenings take place here in the Valley of Armageddon, Valley of Jezreel. And so it's not really just a big, long valley. There's all kinds of little cutouts and so on around mountains. Mount Tabor is kind of off there in the middle. Anyway, so it's a huge place. When you drive in through there, you'll see, it's 15, 20 miles across and really fun to look at. So I'll pass this around, but this is a map of the victory of Deborah over the Canaanites. And then we also went over Gideon. And this one, I wanted to go back through when I have a map here. I wanted to show you this. The Bible describes a number of the groups that were with the Midianites. It wasn't just Midianites. Midianites lived down here in the southern, southeastern corner of the land of Palestine and beyond. It was also Ammonites and some of these other nomadic groups that lived out in the desert. And there are still to this day people that love to live out in the desert and live on very little. Anyway, they live very odd lives. But the Bible describes them as having come into the land of the Philistines. The best way to get there from the Midianite territory and the Ammonite is south of the Dead Sea and up here into the Philistine territory. And what were they doing? How were they oppressing the children of Israel? By eating their crops, right? By stealing their harvest. And that's why Gideon was threshing the wheat in the wine press. He was threshing wine in the wheat place. No. So they're stealing crops. They're eating everything. And there's 135,000 Midianites. That's enough to just vacuum everything as you go, You picture our helicopter candy drop, right? That we do in the fall. And man, those kids just, and as they march across the field, it just disappears. That's what I think of when I think of 135,000 Midianites. Going up this valley, they just easily wiped everything out as they went along. And then they come up here, they meet all the way up here. Gideon meets them here. So they come up into here, cross over the mountain chain. This mountain here is Mount Carmel. And they come up to here, south of Mount Carmel. They cross over into the valley. Ooh, here's another big valley. Let's wipe this thing out. And that's what they do. And Gideon meets them up in here in this valley. When they leave from there, they'll run out across this way and run out into the desert. And there's cities out here where they were going to, and he chases after them, and they kill them all. So, all right, so this is a map here of Gideon and his battle with the Amalekites, the Ammonites, the Midianites. There were quite a few, actually. But a lot of these events happen up here in the valley of Jezreel, and then they head out into the wilderness, and he chases them along on the way out there. Okay, we've got two more main oppressors, and then we've also got several other smaller ones. I mentioned to you Jair, right? Is that the last one I gave you? Okay, so let's go to Jephthah now. Jephthah, and this will be found in Judges chapter 10. I want to finish Judges today, and I want to get through the book of Ruth. That's my goal. Judges chapter 10 and verse number 6, we're going to look at Jephthah. Jephthah was from Ramoth Gilead, and that is up here in this area. Jephthah's up here. And he's born here to a harlot. And so obviously the children of Israel would have looked down on him, and even his own family members cast him out because he wasn't really one of them. And they cast him out. He becomes a man of war, and he spends his time out here with the Ammonites. It would be the Ammonites then that would attack, and Jephthah says, or his family says, can you come back and help us? Because you're a man of war. And so he comes back to help them, and they defeat the Ammonites. So let's talk about this. With each of these, I've been trying to, or at least with most of these, I've been trying to give you the oppressor, how long their oppression lasted, and then some things about the story itself, real quick things. So the oppressor is the Ammonites that lasted for about 18 years of oppression before they ask for Jephthah to come in there and give them the victory. All right, so in chapter 10, Judges chapter 10, verse 6, they're doing evil again. It talks about their sin. They're off into idolatry and so on. Chapter 11, verse 1, Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty man of valor, the son of an harlot, and Gilead begat Jephthah. He has some of the details that we're not going to spend time on. Look at verse number 10. Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if ye bring me home again to fight against the children of Ammon, and the Lord deliver them before me, shall I be your head? And they said, yes, the Lord be witness between us if we do not so according to thy words. So he goes with them, and he becomes the leader. Now, verse 12, and this is a very interesting exchange going on here between Jephthah and the king of the Ammonites. There's diplomacy going on here. So I'll read through this, and we'll look at I'll stop and comment on a few things. In my other class, we'll go through all the details of this diplomacy. And there's three main arguments that the Ammonites make for why the land that they're on should belong to them and not to the children of Israel. This is our land. We were here before you. If you know anything about Israel, that's an argument to this day with the Palestinians and the Muslims. Who was here first? So if the Jews can prove they were there first, with Hezekiah's tunnel, with all the stones of the temple foundation, I mean, on and on. Of course the Jews were there first. The Bible teaches that. But so that's the argument going on here as well. I'll read through a few of these verses. Starting in chapter 11, verse 12, Jephthah sent messengers unto the king of the children of Ammon, saying, what hast thou to do with me that thou art come against me to fight in my land? The king of the children of Ammon answered the message of Jephthah, because Israel took away my land when they came up out of Egypt, from Arnon even unto Jabbok and unto Jordan. Now therefore restore those lands again peaceably. Jephthah said, no, we're not going to do that. Israel took not away the land of Moab, nor the land of the children of Ammon. But when Israel came up out of Egypt, walked through the wilderness and the Red Sea, and came to Kadesh, then Israel sent messengers and so on. He argues through the whole thing. Verse number 19, Israel sent messengers unto Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon. Israel said, let us pass, we pray thee. But Sihon trusted them not. So the Lord our God gave us the victory, he says. Verse 23, so now the Lord God of Israel hath dispossessed the Amorites. Wilt thou not, in verse 24, possess that which Chemosh thy God giveth thee to possess? So whomsoever the Lord our God shall drive out from before us, them will we possess. Okay, so that was the first argument that the Ammonites make against Jephthah, is that their God had given them the victory. And Jephthah, of course, responds that no, it was our God that gave us the victory. And if you want to argue this point, in those days, obviously anybody who could control the land, they gave the credit to their gods. I think I mentioned last week, right towards the end, that they had the understanding that the God of the land controlled the land. Every land had a god. And so Jephthah says, if Chemosh gives you your land, you keep your land. If my God gives us our land, then we keep our land. So it's the argument there. So they continue on with that. Verse 26, while Israel dwelt in Heshbon and her towns, and in Aurora and her towns, and all the cities that be along by the coast of Arnon, 300 years, why therefore did ye not recover them within that time? So we've been here for 300 years. All right, that's a very significant number there. 1400 is when they came into the land. This is now about 1100. I don't think it's meant to be an exact number. You can almost hear it's about 300 years that we've been here. It's a rounded off number. Wherefore I have not sinned against thee, but thou doest me wrong to war against me. Verse 28, howbeit the king of the children of Ammon hearkened not unto the words of Jephthah. Anyway, so there's this back and forth diplomacy between Jephthah and the Ammonites. So finally Jephthah makes this foolish vow, and this is the primary thing that he's known for. And it's too bad, right? And one event in your life, and that's a bad event, and that's what you're remembered for. But he makes this rash vow in verse number 30. Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord and said, if thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands, it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So as he fights, he wins. Verse 34, he came to Mizpah unto his house, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him. And he rent his clothes. Alas, my daughter, thou hast brought me very, very low, and thou art one of them that trouble me, for I have opened my mouth unto the Lord, and I cannot go back. And she said, whatever you're going to do, do it. The next verse. But I'd like to go and bewail my virginity. Verse 37. And he said, go. And when she came back, came to pass the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow, which he had vowed. And she knew no man. All right, so here's the question. Did Jephthah actually take his daughter and kill his daughter? Sacrifice her for a burnt offering? The other option is, and a lot of people believe, maybe some of you, a lot of people believe that Jephthah didn't actually take his daughter and put her on an altar and cut her throat and sacrifice her to the Lord, but that he instead gave his daughter to the Lord. And she became one of those that dwelt with the virgins in the mountains, and she never got married. So in both senses, they would say that he gave her to the Lord, and she never got married. But others would say that he never actually killed his daughter. Anybody have an opinion on this? There's a lot of arguments that go into this. One of the arguments is that he never said that he was actually going to present her as a burnt offering. He was actually saying, I'm going to give her to the Lord as a sacrifice, whatever God wants. And that's what she became, she was given to the Lord. Anybody have an opinion on this? What is the natural, when you read this, what does it naturally seem to say to you? That he killed her. That's the natural understanding of it. Would you agree with that? Disagree with that? What do you think? Agree? He said, I'm going to offer up as a burnt offering, and then he did with her according to his vow. Yes?
I mean, if you just read this passage by itself, it would seem that. But since we know that the Lord he wouldn't take a human sacrifice.
Okay. Anybody else? Obviously he wouldn't.
Why at the end would he say, would it be important to put, and she knew no man, if she was
Right.
dead? Because, I mean,
Sure.
that would seem to be-
There's that argument. I understand that this isn't a life or death situation for us, Doesn't mean whether or not he did isn't a big deal. But to me, you stick with what is the natural understanding, and if that doesn't make sense, then, or if that seems to be off, then you do a word search on different words and understanding what the burnt sacrifice meant, etc., etc. Were there young ladies that were virgins around the temple? There certainly seems to be indication of that. In the end of the book of Judges, we're going to see another example of that soon. So a lot of people believe both sides. A lot of good people believe both sides of the issue. I tend to take the natural meaning, and to me, the only arguments I get are God wouldn't have accepted that. And I agree, he wouldn't have. But that doesn't mean he didn't do it. Of course God didn't want that. That's why it's a foolish vow. So let me have you think about this. What did Jephthah think would come out? Whatsoever cometh out. I mean, do you think a sheep's going to come running out to meet you? No? I mean, a dog? Yeah, I mean, right, a cat? I mean, what do you think is going to come out there? Yeah, so crazy. I mean, what would the natural thing to come out of a house to meet a man coming home is a child? Right? I mean, it just seems really dumb to me that I say dumb to me. It's dumb. It's a very foolish vow. The point I think we should draw from this, and this is something that we can say is important to us. Whether or not he killed her is really not that important to us, but what is important is if you make a vow, make a wise vow. And another point is if you make a vow, keep it. Okay, right? So, I think he kept it, and I think it was a very dumb vow. Obviously. Any thoughts? Okay. Jephthah. Interesting guy. By the way, he defeated all the Ammonites. This is where the story of the Ammonites, many of them were trying to flee from the west side, to flee across the Jordan River to get out. And a lot of them, oh no, I'm saying it backwards. Okay, no, never mind. It was in this battle, but there was a group of Ephraimites, that's what it was. Ephraimites that were mad at Jephthah for not calling them to the battle. So they had come out here and were trying to confront Jephthah for not inviting them. And now Jephthah's defeating them, Ephraimites, and they tried to sneak back across. And of course they caught them by making them say Shibboleth. And they couldn't say Shibboleth, they said Sibboleth. They had a lisp in their mouth. And that's how they identified them. And anybody who had the wrong lisp was killed. So make sure you don't have a lisp. Work on your lisp. Right? Anyway, that's an interesting part of this story as well. So that's Jephthah. Let's give you a couple more judges, and then we'll get to Samson. Ibzan. Good names for your children someday. Ibzan, Elon. We have one of those in our church. And Abdon is another one. Abdon. These are all in chapter 12. Trying to figure out who it is. Your neighbor, Anna. His name is Elon. Your neighbor, Mr. Howe. His first name is Elon. Elon Edgar Howe. All right. Samson. Let's move on to Samson. Okay, Samson. Oh, by the way, I have a map of Jephthah. So you can kind of see this is the Dead Sea. Ephraimites come across to help them, this little purple line. And then they try to sneak back across, and the Shibboleth story takes place. But Jephthah and his victory, if you want to see that, you can catch me afterwards. All right, Samson. There's not a lot as far as on the map to see here, but Samson has dealings with the Philistines, and he goes down to Ashkelon and Gaza and Ekron and Gath, and he just lives literally a few miles from the Philistines. It's pretty crazy. I love this story of Samson because there's so many little details like this that we find about him. So let me give you some thoughts about him, and then we'll tell you quickly his story, as you know a lot of the story. Anyway, Samson's name means sunlight. Sunlight. The oppressor during the days of Samson, of course, is the Philistines, and that would be down here in on the plains. Different cities along there. By the way, they have identified most of these city sites. Gath, for sure, is identified. Gaza is identified. Tells. I wouldn't recommend ever going to visit them. That might be very dangerous for you. So, but he lived here. Here I see Beth Shemesh. We went to Beth Shemesh. And just across the valley, and I'll bring a picture in when we get into Samuel. At Beth Shemesh is when the Ark of God came back up the long valley, and you could look down several miles down this long valley and see where it came from, the land of the Philistines up the valley. Across from Beth Shemesh in that valley, there was a series of hills on the other side of the valley, and it's those hills where Samson lived and where he grew up. In chapter 13, verse number 2 talks about his family. There should be a place where it mentions some of the cities. There we go. Verse 25 of chapter 13. The Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan between Zorah and Eshtaol. And then in the next chapter, Samson went down to Timnath. Timnath is a place where there were Philistines. So these are all right there around Beth Shemesh, this area right here on the map, about 15 to 20 miles straight west of Jerusalem. Okay? So what I love about this is that Samson lived among the Philistines, very close, just a few miles away. This is nothing for him to walk in one day down to the Timnath and then walk back in the evening. It's a few miles. Have you ever walked a few miles around the lake, right? 2.25 miles is 3 laps. It might have been 4 or 5 miles down to Timnath. And anyway, so I told you that the Philistines were the oppressor. There was 40 years of oppression. There were 40 years of oppression before Samson finally comes on the scene. And of course, he was chosen of God to defeat the Philistines. By the way, it's hard to defend, hard to make Samson in any way look like a good guy. Right? He was a judge, yeah. You know what? His name is listed in Hebrews chapter 11 as a man of faith. It's hard to make him a good guy with all the bad things he did. And what you have to understand is that God used him for a purpose. Okay? He's not, I get tired. I don't know how many times I've heard people say that God uses a preacher who falls into adultery, just like he used Samson, who fell into adultery. Samson wasn't a preacher. He was a judge. He was a military deliverer. He was a fighter. That's it. He wasn't qualified to be a preacher. So don't even equate the two together. There's no such thing. All right, let me mention some, obviously you know the stories, and I can kind of give you hopefully a little more insight into some of the things that happened here. There's a numerous list of defeats against the Philistines, and that's what he was doing. He wasn't there to preach the gospel to every creature. He was there to defeat the Philistines, and God used him to defeat the Philistines. So, let me ask you this again. When did the children of Israel get victory or relief from their oppressors? How did they get relief from their oppressors? What's our cycle? When they did what? When they repented. So, I know Samson wasn't a very godly person. And I say that kind of, the Bible actually tells us some pretty good things about Samson, but he wasn't a very godly person. But evidently there were enough people that had repented and were praying to the Lord for help that God used Samson to give them victory and deliverance anyway, in spite of him. You understand? So, but let me actually, before I just thought of that, I should probably point that out. What are some good things that we know about Samson? Nothing, right? What are some good things? Amen. Amen. Yes?
Well, at the end, he asked God to help him be able to crush the Philistines that were there.
Sure.
Though even then, it was kind of a selfish thing.
Yeah.
Revenge him, so.
Okay, so you mentioned that. Do you know that every time the Bible records Samson praying, God answers his prayer? Every time. There's several times where Samson prayed to the Lord for help, and every time God gave him an answer. He also, let me think, he also never mistreated women, even though he had nothing but problems with women. He never was, mean or beat them. There's no sign of anything like that. So I know that's kind of not that I'm not belittling, obviously, but he's never known for that at all. When he prayed, he got his answers. How many times does the Bible say about him, I don't know if you'll have a number for me, but how many times does the Bible say about Samson that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him? You ever thought about that? Many times. Numerous times, at least. So, the Spirit of the Lord, in a day when the Spirit of the Lord didn't come on people, but rarely, he came on Samson to accomplish a purpose again. So, Samson does have some commendable things about him, even though I wouldn't let my daughter get anywhere close to him, because he's a pervert. Just being honest with you. Let me give you 6 things that he did in defeating the Philistines. 6 stories, as you probably know all of these. The first one is when he wanted a wife and he killed 30 Philistines to get her. That's a start. That's all you got, 30? I mean, later he could build his way up to 1,000, right?
Isn't that just to get a change of clothes for a bet he made or something?
The 30 was, yes. Yep. So he killed 30 Philistines. So what's he doing? He's defeating the Philistines. Think of it that way. This is not, man, I think I'm going to do what he did. I'm going to demand from my parents a bad wife so that I can go and hurt. No, there's nothing to be learned from that other than the fact that he's killing the Philistines and getting victory over the enemies of God. Secondly, after his wife was given away, he then burned the fields of the Philistines with what? 300 foxes. So there's a lot of debate on this. Did he actually have the kind of foxes that we think of today? Was a fox in those days the same type of animal as the fox of our day? I don't know, but I know that whatever animal it was, it had a large tail because he tied the tails together. I've seen foxes before, right? And they have big plumy tails. They'd make a great fire starter, right? I wouldn't try that, but I got a close-up view of a fox one time. Some of you might remember when my daughter got bit by a fox. A rabid fox. Go figure, huh? Oh, that was the craziest thing I've ever seen. So the fox was under our van when we're getting into our van. All of a sudden, I hear my daughter screaming. And I looked at her, and a fox has her by the foot. A fox! Go figure. So I kicked the fox as hard as I could, and the thing, flew a few feet through the air and then just sat there and looked at me. I'm like, something's wrong with the fox. So then the thing just is a red fox. Thing starts walking towards us, and I, of course, had immediately picked her up. My daughter was 2, Andrea, when it happened. So the thing kind of started walking towards us again, so I picked her up and ran her to the house. I knew right away something was wrong with the fox, and it was rabid. So Grandpa went and got the shotgun, and we killed the fox and hauled the thing off to the vet, to have it checked out. Anyway, so I have a close-up view of a fox, and it wasn't a very good memory. Andrea acts like she remembers, but you know how it is. She might, I don't know. Can you remember stuff when you're 2, though? Probably not. Something that dramatic, you might. So that's the second of the opportunities he has against Philistines. The third is when he used the jawbone of a donkey to kill 1,000 Philistines. Okay, now I've seen donkeys before, and they're not as big as a normal cow. But I've seen, not to be gross, but I've seen skeletons of cows. When we had a cow that died of different things, normally we ate them. When we butchered a cow, we ate it. But there was a few times where we had a cow that died of something else, and we had to take their carcass out into the woods. And so I've seen the skeleton. And so I've seen the bone. It's basically this bottom bone comes out, and it would have probably been about 12 inches long, and it's large on one end, and it comes down to the mouth on the other end, which is smaller. And so it would make a perfect, just grab a handle a little over a foot long, and like a big club on the other end of it, and just go to town. But 1,000? I mean, it's just crazy to even try to figure out how he had that much strength to keep swinging that thing.
And why they would keep coming.
And they're so dumb they keep coming, right? Like you get up to about number 751, and it's about time to call it quits. But no, they keep coming. All right, so the jawbone of the donkey. Number 4 is when he hauls away the gates of Gaza. He's at Gaza to see a woman, and he's trapped inside. When he gets there to the gate, it's locked, and they know he's in there. And so he leans down, puts his back to the gate, and just stands up. And the whole thing comes right out of the ground. So it's crazy. I mean, it's just ridiculous to even think about. The Bible describes what all came with it. It wasn't just the gate. It was the posts. It was all the hardware on it. I mean, the Bible describes and says that, everything came out with it. And then he hauled it away. And according to the map, if it's true that he carried it to Hebron, I don't know if there was a different Hebron, but Hebron is about 20 miles from Gaza. So, and it's all uphill. I'm not kidding. It's crazy. So whether there was a different Hebron or not, I don't know. But the Lord just gave him unbelievable power. Who knows what this thing would have weighed? So, crazy. And then there's the story of Delilah. And in that story, he kills a number of Philistines also. Now, I know in the end, they cut his hair off. But in the story of Delilah, remember how she kept saying, "The Philistines be upon thee." And the big fool keeps on, this is pretty funny, I wonder who's telling the Philistines that I'm here and ready to be taken. And he knew it was her. That's what's so dumb about it. But sin just makes you really, really blind and dumb. And so he keeps on falling for this, and she keeps on going for it, and finally he tells her the truth. But the point is that in each of those times, he kills those Philistines. He kills the next group of Philistines. And then finally they get his hair cut off. All right, and then lastly, number 6 is at the temple of Dagon. And there he kills more in his death than he had killed all throughout his life. 3,000 Philistines falling from the roof and crushed by the roof underneath. So a very large temple there. Okay, let me just point out here, we know this, but Samson, of course, was a Nazirite. He had taken the Nazirite vow from birth. He wasn't supposed to eat or partake of any wine type, not wine, any grape type substance, which should be grapes, fresh grapes, raisins, wine, grape jelly. I mean, there's no kind of grape that he was allowed to eat. And then he wasn't supposed to ever get his hair cut, and he wasn't ever supposed to come into contact with a dead body. So, anyway, so no haircuts. By the way, the Bible says it's a shame for a man to have long hair, and I've heard people say that, yeah, Jesus didn't have long hair because it's a shame. Or I'm sorry, no, that's not the argument. The argument would be that that these people who did have long hair, that they were ashamed. Okay? The reason they took the vow was to make themselves look ridiculous. And they did it as a sign that they were given over to God. And people knew that. So, in other times, the vow included, like it did with Paul, they'd cut all their hair off. They'd shave themselves. So, it was designed, the purpose of any of these vows with the hair was designed to make you look weird. Think about it. You looked ridiculous. And the point was, people saw you and they said, oh, that person's set apart. They're set apart. So that's not an excuse for us to go get long hair or anything like that. You already look like a Christian when you look like a decent person when you keep your hair short. Guys. Any thoughts about Samson? Okay, let me check my time here. See, my 1:15 thing came and went. So, Katie's not happy. No. You want a mint? Yes. I was just wondering. Yeah, I better give her one. Mm-hmm. Okay, now, Judges chapter 17 through 21 are set apart from the first 16 chapters of Judges. And let me explain these to you real quick. In my notes, I actually have chapters 1 and 2 as apathy, chapters 3 through 16, or chapter 2 through 16, last of chapter 2 through chapter 16, as apostasy. That's the Judges. And then I have this section, I call this anarchy. Anarchy. You know what anarchy is, right? There's no king in Israel, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Now, chapters 17 through 21 and the book of Ruth fit into this category of anarchy. Now, let me explain myself. With these three events, chapter 17 and 18 is the story of the tribe of Dan literally uprooting from this area where Samson lived. Samson lived here in the tribe of Dan next to the Philistines, and they couldn't drive him out, so they just put up with him. And eventually they say, we're done with this. We don't want the territory that God gave us. We're going to move as far away from the Philistines as we can. And they would move literally right up in here underneath Mount Hermon and kill a bunch of women and kids to get it, by the way. So they leave here, They move up north. That's 17 and 18. And they do all kinds of ridiculous things in the process. Every man does that which is right in his own eyes in the days of the judges. Chapters 19 through 21, 3 more chapters, are about here in the middle in Gibeah. There's a man who had a concubine, so he had more than one wife. And the concubine runs away, and he goes after her, and he brings her back. She ends up getting killed by a bunch of homosexuals. And then he does some terrible things. And all the other tribes gang up on the tribe of Benjamin, because the Benjamites defended Gibeah, and all the other tribes gang up on them and wipe them out, except for a couple hundred men is all that's left of the tribe of Benjamin. And then they do other crazy things to try to, and then they feel bad. Oh, we're going to lose the whole tribe of Benjamin. So they do these ridiculous measures to try to get them back. Everybody did that which is right in their own eyes. That's the first 2 sets that we're going to talk about. The third one then is the book of Ruth. Now I know we think of the book of Ruth as a love story, and it really is. But the whole setting of the book of Ruth is pretty chaotic also. You know, what's his name? Elimelech and Naomi moved to Moab because there's no food in Bethlehem. Are you kidding? The house of bread? The house of bread is what Bethlehem means, and there's no food there. Why? Because God's punishing them. They leave. They go over to Moab. They all die except for, a few of them. Anyway, it's just a huge mess. And so they come back, and everybody's trying to figure out what to do. Anyway, all of this fits the narrative of the anarchy going on in the days of the judges when there was no king in Israel. Everybody does that which is right in their own eyes. So I actually made, a couple years ago, I made something that I could quickly summarize this. So I'm going to just read to you. This is over the book, over the final 5 chapters of Judges. So the first story is about the tribe of Dan moving to the north. So in chapter 17, there's a story about a man, and I'll show you on the map where it is. There's a man named Micah. He lived in Ephraim. Ephraim is these mountains. The mountains of Samaria, but kind of the southern part of these mountains of Samaria, which is right here. Micah, there was an Ephraimite who made a house of gods. And he wanted an ephod and a priest to go with his own house of gods. So is he going to the tabernacle? No. I'm going to have my own house of gods. So he said, why not? I can, so I will. I have lots of money. He stole money from his own mother to get this house of gods. And he makes an ephod and a priest to go with it. He wanted that. So all of a sudden, here comes this priest from the south. The priest comes up through here, and he doesn't have a job. So he comes to Micah's house, and Micah makes this young priest his own personal priest. And it seems to be very weird, in my opinion. I'll just leave it at that. Just very weird relationship. That's chapter 17. In chapter 18, the Danites send a group of spies, really is what they were. The Danites send a group of spies up through here to go up to scout out some new territory. And as they're coming through here, they come to this house of Micah. And they stop there. And they inquire of the Lord, of that ephod, and that priest told them they're going to have nothing but peace. So they go up there and they find all this area, and it seems to come to pass what this priest said, that they're going to have nothing but peace. So they go up there, they scout out a city that they're going to wipe out, kill everybody, and move into it, Laish. They would rename that Dan, city of Dan. And I've been there, and it's a place there you can go and visit. Of course, that Dan is where one of those golden calves that Jeroboam would build later on. So, but that city of Dan, a lot of that is still, foundations are all in existence still. So when they come back down, these spies come back home to get the rest of their tribe. And when they go back up with everybody, they come to that house of Micah again, and they say, we're taking your priest with us. We're going to set up our house of gods up at our new city, and we need a priest up there. And you're coming with us. And at first Micah says, no, you can't do that. He's my priest. And the tribe of Dan said, we're taking him. You can stop us if you like. Have a good day. And they take this priest and they set up their own worship system. From this early time, they set up their own worship system at Laish, at Dan. They go up there, they kill everybody, and they move into the city of Laish. So that's what happens in chapter 17 and 18. Everybody does that which is right in their own eyes. I mean, totally. Now, chapters 19 through 21. A totally separate story. There's another Levite living in Ephraim, and we find out where he's from later. He's from Gibeon, and he goes through Gibeah. Anyway, he took a concubine from Bethlehem, just south of Jerusalem, and his concubine left him, and she went back home. So he had gotten her, or he lived here. He went down to Bethlehem, got her, and he moved back home. She left him and went back to Bethlehem after a while, because he obviously, I don't know if he wasn't a good husband. I have no idea. But she wasn't faithful. And he went there after 4 months to try to win her back. And her father says, no, don't leave. Just stay here another day. And they keep doing this thing day after day. And by the time it was too late in the day, they would have to stay another day. And of course, they couldn't travel all of that in a short day. They had to have an entire day to travel from Bethlehem back up to just a little other side of Bethel. So finally, on the 5th day, he says, enough's enough. It's the afternoon of the 5th day. We're leaving. He shouldn't have done that, because it's the whole day of travel. Well, they left. And by the evening time, they're passing Jebus. If you know Jebus, that's the Jebusites who lived at Jerusalem. Jerusalem wasn't inhabited as a city yet of the Jews at all. It was a fort of the enemy. Jebusites lived there. And he quickly passed Jebusites, and he got up into the hills a little bit north of Jebus, and he thought he was in friendly territory. He stopped at Gibeah. And the story you read there is exactly like Sodom and Gomorrah. It's exactly like the angels going to Lot. They meet on the street. Oh, you can't stay in the street. You got to come into my house. That night, of course, all the homosexuals come by, banging the door down. Give us that, give us whatever, the stranger that you brought in. And, well, this man, the man himself won't go out, but he sends his wife out, his concubine. And the homosexuals abuse her and kill her. So, what does the man do? It's the husband, the Levite. He takes his dead wife's body, cuts it up into 12 pieces, and sends her body throughout the nation of Israel, to every tribe, saying, help me fight against the town of Gibeah. Perverted, disgusting, horrible. Anybody does that which is right in their own eyes. All the other tribes get these body parts and say, Gibeah is done. We're going to come after these homosexuals. They come down to Benjamin, which is, Gibeah is in the tribe of Benjamin. And they came to the Benjamites and they said, you hand over those people that did this. And the tribe of Benjamin said, no, they're our people. We're not giving them up. The tribe of Benjamin stood with the homosexuals. So, Gibeah stood with the men and refused to turn them over. All the other cities of Benjamin came to help Gibeah fight against the Israelites. So, they have this big battle, all of Israel against Benjamin. Now, Israelites, get this. The Israelites, the main army, had 400,000 soldiers. Benjamin had 26,000. Are you getting this? So, we have 26K against 400,000 soldiers. The first day, 22,000 Israelites died. Hardly any Benjamites. It's a knockdown drag out by the little guys. So that evening, the Israelites come back to God. They I don't know if they had what they had there, but they prayed like crazy and said, Lord, please help us. We're trying to squash out this sin in Benjamin, and we got defeated. So God said, go back to battle the next day. The Lord said, go up. So the next day, 18,000 more Israelites died. Okay, why did God send them out? Finally, that evening, after great prayer and fasting, God said that he would deliver them the next day. The next day, they set an ambush like they did at Ai. And God helped them kill 25,100 of these Benjamites. There was 900 left. 600 Benjamites, okay, so of these, 600 Benjamites fled to a rock. It's evidently like Masada or some very high place where it's very easy to defend. 600 Benjamites fled to a rock called Rimmon and stayed there for 4 months. That's by the time you get to the end of chapter 20. Now, chapter 21, all the Israelites feel bad. All these guys who've been whooped up by the Benjamites and finally got their revenge. And it seems for a just cause, right? Getting rid of the homosexuals in Gibeah. Now, the Israelites feel bad and they want to keep the tribe of Benjamin. Look, all we have is 600 Benjamites. What can we do to help the tribe of Benjamin come back and repopulate them? All the Israelites had sworn not to marry Benjamites. And so, this is just out of control. So the Israelites said, is there anybody who didn't promise not to marry a Benjamite? And they said, oh, there's some people in Jabesh Gilead over here who didn't promise not to marry a Benjamite. And they didn't come to the battle. Let's take these people of Jabesh Gilead, kill their husbands for not helping fight this battle. We'll take their wives and we'll give those wives to the Benjamites, the 600 that are left. So they did. They brought 400 young virgins. I'm sorry, they didn't kill just the men. They killed the men and the women, the married women and children. But the young virgins they kept alive of the Jabesh Gileadites. They brought 400 virgins down to the rock called Rimmon. And here's all these 600 soldiers on top, Benjamites. And they said, hey, we got 400 wives for you. Come and get them. But they're still short 200. What can we do? So all these 400 of them came down and snagged a wife. The other 200, they took them to Shiloh. And there was a whole meeting of young virgins there who were there to worship the Lord. Shiloh's the place where the tabernacle was. They're worshiping the Lord. And these 200 literally chased down and married one of these virgins. Had to sneak through the woods and find them and marry him. And they justified that. They said that's okay. The 200 caught themselves a wife. Any father or brother who complained, the Bible mentions this, was supposed to just accept the elders' decisions. Okay. Corrupted? Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. This place is corrupted. Chaotic as all get out. Any thoughts? Aren't you glad you don't live at Shiloh, young ladies? These jokers. Oh my goodness. All right, let me, lastly then, that's the first two stories. Dan and the tribe of Benjamin. Those are the two chaotic stories that we find at the end of Judges. Now, let me give the story of Ruth real quickly, and all of you that love the story of Ruth, I've got a few minutes to go through this. So, Ruth has only 4 chapters. Let me talk now about the book of Ruth and what happens here. I'll just quickly divide the book into 4 sections because there's 4 chapters. We see first Ruth's sorrow. Ruth's sorrow. Ruth comes on the scene because of the family of Elimelech and Naomi disobeying God. They moved to Moab to get relief from a famine. The famine was a result of the punishment of God. By the way, think of all this that's happened in the book of Judges. The key is not to go to Moab to find food. The key is to come to God. Right? Isn't that always the answer in this cycle? If you repent you come back to God, then God will hear you and give you deliverance from your enemies. So you want deliverance? Come back to the Lord. And they didn't do that. They fled to Moab to get deliverance, and that's never the answer. Go to Egypt. That's never the answer. Come back to the Lord is the answer. So, but God uses situations like this to give a poor young lady named Ruth, to give her an opportunity, because I really believe that she was searching. God works that way. She was searching for truth. And when she met them and they told her about their God, she said, I want your God to be my God. I don't want to go back to the worshiping, is it Chemosh of the Moabites? I don't want to worship him again. But Ruth's sorrow, she becomes a part of this family, and her husband then dies. Who was her husband? Mahlon or Chilion? I always forget. Chilion? Yes, Chilion. Mahlon married Orpah. Ruth's sorrow. In chapter 2, we see Ruth's service. So Ruth comes back with Naomi. What's her name mean? Bitter. I'm sorry.
Joy.
Naomi doesn't mean bitter. Mara means bitter. Yes.
Joy.
Close. Pleasant it might mean joy. I'm not sure, but pleasant is the word that comes to my mind. So she comes back to Bethlehem, and there at Bethlehem is the fields of Boaz, and we've, I think, touched on this already, but of course Boaz is the son of Rahab. Son? Yes, son of Rahab. You remember that? So, pretty amazing that that quickly Rahab's family is involved in the line of the Israelites, and a very important line at that. So, what does Ruth do? She goes out in the fields and she works for gathering food for her and her mother-in-law, who's widowed, of course. There's no service in place. There's no welfare service. There's no widow's service. You either get out there and you find your food, or you're going to starve to death. And if you're a widow, you had a very hard time of it. Now, she did have land. We know that because that land was bought up by Boaz. So she did have some commodities. She had some value in the land. But she had to get out there and work for the food. And of course, God had provided for that in the law, in the book of Leviticus. There's clear instructions on if a woman loses her husband, she's allowed to go out in the fields. And there's instructions for the planters and the harvesters that they don't harvest the corners of the field, which is an amazing thought. Just pointed out to me not that long ago, and I thought it was a great thought. The Bible never says how big their corner had to be that they gave away. You could leave one stalk in the corner and you had left the corner. Or you could leave 10 feet or 50 feet. You could make huge wide turns at the corners and not harvest the corners. So how much were you willing to give away? It's the same question we're faced with every time we give. How much are you willing to give? You can leave the tithe and you're obeying God. But that's not really what God is interested in. He's interested in how big your measure of faith is. So if your faith is big, you leave big corners. You see that? I think it's a great thought. So what's Boaz doing? I don't know if this is true, but it sure seems to fit. Ruth chapter 2, where's Boaz at in the morning? He's got his workers out there working away. Let's see here. Verse 4. Behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, he starts talking to them. And let's see here. It definitely, somewhere I read that seems to be in the midday. So where was Boaz at in the morning? So the argument, the point I was pointing out to me is that Boaz was instructing the workers how big to make their corners. I want you to leave a big corner here. Anyway, I don't know if that's true or not. But so Boaz comes out there, and of course he sees Ruth across the field, the ravishing beauty. And he's an old geezer, and she's young and beautiful. He probably was fairly old. All the girls are grossing out all of a sudden. Anyway, so Ruth's service. Let's move on. Chapter 3, we find Ruth's surrender to the will of God. Her surrender to the will of God. She goes home to her mother-in-law, Naomi, and Naomi finds out where she's been reaping. And of course, she sees how big and full the bag is. And we know that it wasn't just that she picked up the few little things that had fallen, because there were actually handfuls on purpose that had been dropped to provide for her. You know, he instructed the reapers to drop extra big handfuls if you're close to Ruth. Isn't that pretty neat? God does that for us. Gives us what we need when we need it. Pretty neat story. So anyway, when she goes home, Naomi says, "Where you been?" Boaz. Ooh, Boaz. He's single. He's rich. And he has the ability to redeem you. To redeem us, really, is what it would boil down to because of the situation. And Ruth surrenders to that will of God. Naomi says, what you need to do is you need to go out there and let him know that you're interested. What do you think, girls? Not normal, is it? All right, let me just point out here. This is not, the courtship that you're going to use as your example. So what this is when she goes to Boaz and says, it's your duty as the nearest of kin to marry me and to buy up the property if you're willing to buy up the property. You're able. Are you willing to redeem? He was able because he was relative and he was nearest of kin. He was able because he had the money to do it. Would he be willing to do it? And so she presents this to him. This is not her being bold. This is not her stepping out of line. In fact, she's exactly in line with what she's supposed to do. She's supposed to say to that man, will you redeem me? Will you fulfill your responsibility? And Boaz says, yes, I'll fulfill my responsibility. Now, of course, he had a little ulterior motive in there as well, because he wanted to marry her. But she was asking him to fulfill his responsibility. She wasn't asking him for a date or any such thing like that at all. That's not what's going on here. Number 4. In chapter 4, we see Ruth's satisfaction. And this is when Boaz fulfills his responsibility. He goes to the actual nearest of kin, and that nearest of kin says, sure, I'll buy up the property. And then Boaz springs the counter jab punch. He says, if you buy up the property, which you want to do, then you also have to marry Ruth. And he knew that if the nearest of kin actually did that, that nearest of kin, his property would not be split. If he had 3 children, it wouldn't be split 3 ways. It would now be split 4 ways or more, depending on how many children they had with Ruth. And the nearest of kin, I think Boaz knew that the nearest of kin would not go for that. And so the nearest kin rejects that move, and Boaz, with his romance and with his great sappiness, right, he signs off on the contract. Sounds real romantic, doesn't it? He says, yeah, I'll make a deal. Handshake. Ruth, you're mine. Let's go home. Doesn't that sound romantic? So she's fulfilling the responsibility, and he's fulfilling his responsibility. So what's the purpose of the book of Ruth? There's 2 purposes here in the book of Ruth, really. One is to show the story of the kinsman redeemer, and that is a very important lesson that would be used in the example that we would have in the New Testament in Christ, redeeming his inheritance. The church, Israel. And I know they're not the same, but he would redeem Israel. He would redeem the church, will redeem the church in the future. So that's one purpose of it, is to show the story of the kinsman redeemer. The other purpose of the book is the very last couple verses in the book, and that is to show the genealogy from Rahab to King David. Rahab to King David. Who are they? Rahab begat Boaz. Boaz begat Obed. Obed begat Jesse. Jesse begat David. And so that's another purpose for this book.